Everyone stood waiting at the great entrance to Bamburgh Castle. They were all ready to come and see their new queen. Many had spoken as they had ridden across the land of how beautiful she was. The fair and lovely Margaret was there, with the 24 silver keys on the golden hoop at her shoulder, and the great golden key inside of her pocket, ready to come and see her new mother. She stood there, she waited, and when they saw her, everyone was pleased to see that the king was happy with his new wife. The fair and lovely Margaret knelt down in front of this witchetty queen and reached for the 24 silver keys on the golden hoop and raised them towards her new mother. These are for ye. But before the words had left her lips, this woman snatched them from out of her hand and said, "Now I am the Queen of Bamburgh Castle." Everyone in that place gasped. They could not believe that this new queen had snatched the keys away from the fair and lovely Margaret. Shaking and trembling, the fair and lovely Margaret reached for the great golden key, pulled it up towards this woman, and yet again she snatched it from out of her hands and said, "Now I shall be the Queen of Bamburgh Castle." Again, everyone gasped. Now there was a friend of the child Wines who was standing close by the fair and lovely Margaret, and we've all done this. He tried to whisper what he was thinking, but the whisper was loud enough for everyone to hear, and this is what he said: "We may have a new and a fair queen, but she could never be as beautiful as the fair and lovely Margaret." The witchetty queen heard all of this, but said nothing. But she waited for plan upon plan and scheme within scheme to take away the fair and lovely Margaret's beauty. And that night, everybody danced, everybody sang, everybody ate, everyone drank. And when her husband had gone to his bed, this terrible woman crept down the great stairs inside of the castle and went down into the cellars, and there she took the breath of 7 dead rats. She took the skin of 7 snakes. She took the belly and guts of 7 dead worms, and with slime from snails and slugs she ground them all up and ground them down, and with witchetty words boiled them all down to just 7 drops, which she placed in a stoppered bottle about her neck, and back up the stairs she went to where the fair and lovely Margaret lay sleeping. And as this beautiful woman lay sleeping, she took 1 drop and she ran it from the top of her head to the tip of her chin. She ran a second drop down one arm and down the other arm, and 1 drop down one leg and another drop down the other, and stoppered the bottle about her neck and whispered witchetty words, for she knew what she was going to do. She was going to change the fair and lovely Margaret into a terrible, fearsome, loathsome Laidley worm. Not a worm that you would find underneath any stone, but a huge and terrible dragon of a worm that would slip and slither upon the slime on its belly and ravage this land and take fair Margaret away from her forever. She was well pleased with her work, for true enough, the fair and lovely Margaret's arms all folded under her skin, her 2 legs became as one, and her body was covered in slime, and she was changed into a loathsome Laidley worm that did slip and slither right out of the chamber and out of a window and down onto the ground and away from that castle. And wherever it travelled, the slime would turn the grass black. Wherever it travelled, it would curdle the milk before the cows had even given it. The next morning, her 2 maidservants came into the room and they screamed, "Ah! Oh, our mistress has been taken from out of this castle!" For they looked and they saw the slime trail, never thinking that the fair and lovely Margaret had gone out of the castle, but some great monster had come into that place and had eaten her. everyone wept and wailed, screamed and cried. And who was it who wept and wailed the loudest? But the king's new wife. She lamented for the daughter that she could not find, but she knew full well just what she had done, and everyone travelled about that place to try and find this great and terrible monstrous worm. And always the new queen was at the front. And so it went on, that everyone was trying to find this great and terrible, loathsome Laidley worm, following its slime trails where the wheat was blackened, where the cows would give blood instead of milk. Now it so happened that with the wheat blackening and the oats not being ripened and no milk, that no one had anything to eat in that place. And everyone was travelling far and wide, and the wicked queen would smile to herself, knowing just exactly what it was that she had done. But it so happened that there were two men who were going down by a place called Spindlestone, Heugh. And when they got to that place by the side of the sea, at the mouth of the cave, they heard roaring and snoring. And they believed that the great and terrible monstrous worm lived inside of that place. And so a great trough was cut, and into it was placed milk. Now every night the milk was placed there, and every morning the milk was gone, but at least there were no rotted calves by the side of the road. At least it stayed in that place. But soon the milk was not sufficient for this great and loathsome Laidley worm, and it grew bigger and stronger. And yet again, the blackened marks upon the earth were seen, and no one had anything to eat. Now, such a story would travel far and wide, and it travelled and was heard by the child Wind. The child Wind, who was now a man. Now he was truly a man, with a sword in his hand and a shield in front of him, proudly dressed in all of his armour. And when he had heard these tales, he knew that there must be weirding ways that had been used by some of the witchetty kind. And he knew that if he was to return to help his father so that they could grow crops, that he could find his own sister and rid the world of this Laidley worm, then he must not just travel in an ordinary boat. He took 33 of his best men and got them to chop down rowan trees that are strong against those of the witchetty kind, and they made a boat, and they travelled back across the sea towards Bamborough. And when they were in the North Sea, this queen knew that they were close to that place. And what they did was this. She called for all of her witches, the witches who lived closer to that place, and she called for them all to fly once and twice and 3 times above the boat that brought the child Wind back to that place. And they did their mistress's bidding. They flew once and twice and 3 times above that boat to try and sink it. But it was made of the rowan tree that is strong against the witchetty kind. And they had to fly back to their mistress to tell her that they could not sink the boat. And now, the only friend that she had in all of this world was the great and the terrible, loathsome Laidley worm. And she ordered it to go out and swim once and twice and 3 times about the boat and cause a great whirlpool and sink that boat.